Hi everybody, it's Carrie, also known as EduMom, and we're here. I'm hiding in my bedroom right now talking with all of you because it's February vacation in Massachusetts. Our time-old tradition where we take a break in both February and March and decide to have the kids home for a week. No real purpose to it, no real reason or rationale, but we do it because we've always done it. I was actually having a conversation with somebody yesterday and explaining, oh gosh, you might hear my kids in the background while we're on the phone because it's February vacation. And they said, oh, well, do you guys go to school year round? Is that why you have February vacation? No, we do not go to school year round, but we still have February vacation in Massachusetts. But all of that is for another blog. Today, we're going to talk about ESSA because there are some important deadlines for public comment coming up about the Every Student Succeeds Act, and we need to know what is happening as parents. We're going to take it piece by piece because it's a huge bill and it's super important. Today, we're going to be covering accountability plans. And for folks here in Massachusetts, it's incredibly important to pay attention if you are a parent because there are a lot of windows that are closing right now. One in particular on March the 9th on public comment. So if you want to make sure your voice is heard, now is the time. Now is the time to kind of do your studying, figure out what you want to say, and make sure you submit comment. And I'm going to make sure you have the link. So if you go back to EduMom, where this posting is, I'll make sure the link is up there. But in the future, as we kind of dive into Massachusetts, you want to make sure that you have all the facts that you need to make your opinion known. So anyway, ESSA. It's the latest reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It was signed into law in December. Very different from the No Child Left Behind Act. Now, you might be saying, oh my gosh, you've already lost me. I don't even know what half of these things are. I'm going to pause a little bit, explain to folks that might be interested, just to kind of give us some perspective. We're going to learn together. So what is the No Child Left Behind Act anyway? So No Child Left Behind was a bill that was passed in 2001. It was an act of Congress. It reauthorized the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It really dealt with Title I provisions that applied to disadvantaged students, supporting standards-based education reforms, based on the idea that if we set high standards and establish measurable goals, that we can overall improve outcomes in education. And my favorite senator of all time, God rest his soul, and today is his birthday, United States Senator Ted Kennedy was one of the folks that really championed this bill and worked so hard to make sure that it came to pass. The act required that every state develop assessments to make sure that kids had basic skills. And if you wanted to receive federal funding, state had to give assessments to students to make sure, just kind of take their temperature as they were growing and progressing through school to make sure they were learning these skills. Because it's not just enough to throw money at education and fund it. We have to make sure that at the end of the day, our kids are graduating with a piece of paper that's more than just, some fancy script with their name on it. It's got to mean something, and kids have to be able to graduate with skills that will provide them the opportunity to launch and have a successful and wonderful life. So the act itself, just to be very specific, allowed the states to set their achievement standards. There was not a national standard that was achieved through this. Each state was responsible with kind of setting goals and adapting their own standard. No Child Left Behind also expanded the federal role in public education through further emphasis on that testing, annual academic progress, report cards, teacher qualifications, as well as big changes in funding and how we spend it. The bill passed Congress. It had bipartisan support. Again, my favorite U.S. Senator, being the good Democrat that I am, Ted Kennedy was a huge champion of this. But by 2015, a lot of special interest groups had managed to strip away a lot of these wonderful national features that we had through No Child Left Behind, and now we are left with its replacement, which is ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, which kind of deals with the remnants of what used to be No Child Left Behind. So that's why it's so important to really jump in on this as parents. Under ESSA, states now get a ton of wiggle room in a wide variety of areas. Unfortunately, it waters down a lot of the reforms that we saw in No Child Left Behind. Now, again, don't get me wrong, No Child Left Behind was not perfect by any measure, but with the U.S. Department of Education now seeing that hands-on role it had in accountability and saying, hey, every kid should at least have this basic level skills, that's been scaled back considerably. So now we have to go through and make sure that our state departments of education really step up to the plate and make sure that work that we've done and those standards and what we've all agreed that kids should have by the time they graduate, all of that is preserved. Because we need to remember, folks, even those of us in Massachusetts, where we're number one in the nation. This is a lot of the pushback that I see every single day. Oh, Carrie, well, what are you all worried about? We're number one in education. There's nothing more to see here. We've got it. We got this all figured out. The problem is that our work is not done because we have one of the most gigantic achievement gaps. But the difference between the haves and the have-nots in Massachusetts, it's unconscionable, and we have more work to do. So it took specific reforms to get Massachusetts to where it was. The Education Reform Act of 1993, getting on board with No Child Left Behind, setting those standards and saying we're going to test to make sure that these standards we have in play, they're not just in name only, that these are real things that we want our kids to achieve, and we want to make sure and take the temperature of kids as they go along through our system to make sure that they're actually achieving those goals. So we're at serious risk for sliding backwards. And that's why we as parents have to step up and say, hey, we still want to make sure we're testing our kids along the way to make sure they're developing the skills. They're not just being passed along grade to grade, but we know when there's a problem so we can intervene and take action to make sure we don't end up with 10th graders that don't know how to read. Or we go back to a system in Massachusetts, the one that I was educated under, where we didn't have the MCAS system and we were graduating kids who were functionally illiterate. That's not okay. We don't want to slide back there. We've got to take action. And we as parents have a strong voice that we should use. So let's get on it. Here are some of the things that you need to know. Let's talk accountability plans. So states have to submit accountability plans to the education departments under ESSA. These new ESSA plans are going to start in the 2017 to 2018 school year. They have to be peer reviewed, and the names of the peer reviewers now have to be public. Now, here's a side note. What does that mean? It means that third-party folks with similar expertise have to take a look at these plans that are come up with to make sure the plans are legit. That's what it means. A state can get a hearing if the U.S. Department of Education turns down its plan. In Massachusetts, these plans are actually right now available on the web. I'm going to link to them on edumom.org to make sure you're able to take a look for yourself and make your own assessment. And the window for public comment, again, closes on March the 9th. So we're going to take a look at what parents need to know, provide that link for folks to provide direct feedback about what they think of the new plan. I'm going to provide my own thoughts, some ideas that I've put together because I want to submit my comment too, and I'm going to post that on edumom.org. Hopefully it'll inspire you to write what you think and maybe ask some questions and dig in for yourself. Let's talk about accountability goals. So as part of ESSA as well, states can now pick their own goals, both big long-term goals and smaller short-term goals. Now these goals have to address proficiency on tests, English language proficiency, and graduation rates. The goals have to set an expectation that all the groups that are furthest behind close gaps in achievements and graduation rates. That's incredibly important to us in Massachusetts, again, because all the bragging we do about having the #1 education system in America, we are still 34th in the nation when it comes to the achievement gap. No bueno. The haves and the have-nots in Massachusetts, huge gap. Got to fix it. We got work to do here. We have to do it under ESSA and have a strong plan to attack that. Let's talk accountability systems. First, elementary and middle schools. So states need to incorporate at least 4 indicators into their accountability systems. Now, let's pause for a second to talk about what indicators are. That's more edu-speak. I want to break it down for folks. So fancy folks in worlds outside of education will tell you that indicators are statistics, things that are specifically quantifiable, things we can measure very specifically. But we know in education, sometimes there are underlying things that aren't measurable in a perfect sense. There are mitigating factors. So in education, it's kind of a convoluted way of saying that these are things that we need to measure that can serve as kind of a yardstick to develop policy. For instance, a statistic would be the number of kids who attend a school. That's something we can measure, number of kids, it's a stat. But the number of kids who are able to complete advanced coursework is an indicator because it tells us something about the quality of education that they're receiving inside that school and gives us a clue as to what's actually happening inside the school and a clue as to what we should be doing in terms of making policy changes. So it's more than a stat, but something that indicates the quality of what's actually happening inside that building. So under ESSA, there are a number of ways for us to incorporate those 4 indicators into accountability systems. So it can be things like proficiency on state tests, some other academic factor that can be broken out into a subgroup, for instance, growth on tests. So all of these things can be part of the indicator system. States are also required to add at least one kind of outside the box indicator. So ideas for that are things like student engagement, educator engagement, access or completing advanced coursework, college readiness, school climate, safety, whatever the state thinks makes sense. States also have to figure in participation rates on state tests. So schools with less than 95% participation are supposed to have that included somehow and figure out how to do that. But the participation rate is a standalone factor, not a separate indicator on its own. And you'll also see that there are some special interest groups right now that are pushing parents to have their kids opt out of participating in any of these state tests. So we would have, it's basically, taking the thermometer away and just taking your best guess as to whether or not your kid has a fever, or just going on somebody's gut instinct. We actually have to have the tools we need to assess whether or not our schools have fevers, whether or not we need to intervene with some medicine that can actually fix them for our children. More to come on that. All right, let's talk about high schools. We talked about elementary and middle schools. Let's talk about high schools. So high schools are going to be judged by the same set of indicators, except that graduation rates are also going to be part of a mix, which makes sense, whether or not kids are actually getting through. I think a piece of that is also going to be whether or not they get through high school in 4 years or 5 years. That's also subject to conversation. So weighing those indicators, so obviously, which ones are more important, which ones are less important, the weighing of the indicators, it's going to be up to the states to determine, how those indicators are actually weighed in that formula. Although things like academic indicators, the tests, the graduation rates, will have to count much more as a group than the indicators, that are a little bit more fuzzy in terms of, opportunity to learn or college readiness, because those are things that are a little bit more difficult to quantify. So anyway, this is the first piece where we've been talking about accountability systems, accountability plans that the State Department of Education in your state, in my state of Massachusetts, have to come up with. Here in Massachusetts, again, March the 9th is going to be our opportunity to kind of weigh in on the state accountability plan under ESSA. And that is why it is so important for parents to speak up, get educated on this, do your homework, pay attention, make sure your voice is heard, because this stuff is going to have direct impact on your kids. And whether or not they come home frustrated, whether or not they come home with a test that tells you whether or not you need to make changes, and whether or not you can make a decision as to whether or not the school they're attending is performing and that you're getting some bang for your buck, and your kid's going to end up with a decent education. Anyway, I can hear my kids at the door because, again, it's February vacation and they're stalking me. I think I've come up right against 15 minutes, and that's about the max of time that I can get. Next week, we're going to be talking about low-performing schools and how ESSA directs states to take action when schools are failing kids. Sounds like a no-brainer, right? If your school is failing, somebody's got to intervene and say, hey, you're not allowed to fail kids in perpetuity. You've got to stop the train if the train is off the tracks and correct course. Very, very simple for parents, but for some special interest groups, including the Massachusetts Teachers Association, some folks are trying to rob parents from having access to those tools that we need to determine whether or not a school is failing, and that's not okay. Again, you can't take our thermometer from us when we're trying to take the temperature of the schools we're sending our kids to. You know, how is a parent supposed to make a choice as to whether or not to send their child to a school if we don't know how that school's doing, if we don't have the tools we need to actually assess whether or not it's a decent place to go? Anyway, thanks for watching. See you soon.